Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi worldwide. Jazakallah khair for joining us. Inshallah, we will begin this conference with the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recited by Brother Abu Anas.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ قال عيسى ابن مريم يا بني الله إليكم مصدقا لما بين يدي من التوراة ومبشرا برسول يأتي من بعدي.
A few weeks ago, maybe even a few days ago. Such is the reality that we live in today, that we have become accustomed to attacks or insults on Muslims or our masajids. But this incident took place in 1995 in Oklahoma City. That year, 5 masajids were either burnt down or seriously vandalized. Moreover, there were 222 attacks that took place in the 3 months after the Oklahoma City bombing. These attacks ranged from spitting at women wearing shawls, to death threats, to even a fake bomb thrown at a Muslim daycare center. The media at that time indicated that Islamic fundamentalists were responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing. Obviously, we know now that was not the case. Now let me take you back to another scene, another era. 900 years prior to this incident in 1995. In the year 1095, the first crusade was launched. Another assault, another physical assault on the Muslim Ummah. A physical occupation of the Muslim Ummah. But the Ummah survived. The Ummah will continue to survive physical aggression against us. This does not pose an existential threat to the Ummah. We must realize that the battle between Haqq and Batil has been raging since the time of Adam alayhi salam. Since the time Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he conveyed the wahi sent to him by Allah Azza wa Jal. So this new chapter led by the secular West is part of that same struggle between Haqq and Batil. The West realized that they could not defeat the Muslim Ummah militarily. So they launched a new crusade, a much deadlier attack with profound consequences than just physical wounds. The aim of this new crusade was to uproot Islam from the souls of the Muslims, to make it irrelevant in life's affairs, to reduce it to tedious rituals. This assault predates 9/11. It predates the war on terror. The battle for Muslim hearts and minds has been a project of the West since the 17th century. This assault on the Muslim mind, my brothers and sisters, is an existential threat to the Ummah. The bloody crusades to spread Christianity, as they claim, and to resist the spread of Islam, was now re-energized to infuse secular liberalism upon Muslims. So the origins of this assault on the Muslim mind predates 9/11, it predates the war on terror, it predates ISIS, and so on. Moreover, the idea that secularism is a neutral order, universal in its application, and intellectually sound is false. Secularism is irrational because it irrationally claims that Allah Azza wa Jal, the Creator who created all of us, has no role in our lives. He serves no purpose in man's daily affairs. This is irrational. The very origins of the historical formation we now call the West, the secular, liberal West, was in itself constituted in opposition to the Islamic threat, the Islamic other, specifically the Islamic threat on an epistemological level and on a political level. So the fear of Islamic governance, that is the Khilafah, the fear of the Muslim subject himself or herself, is historically inextricable from Western ideology, because Islamophobia helped constitute the West. Islamophobia, my dear brothers and sisters, is an ideological byproduct and not just an outcome of a set of terror attacks. Hence, the ideas of Islam are demonized. They're called extreme. They're called irrational. They're called medieval. And as Sam Harris, one of the neoliberal elites and a frequent commentator on Islam, as he put it, quote, Islam is the motherlode of bad ideas. This is what he says. So if you want to live under Islam, if you want to live by your Aqidah, if you want to rule by the Sharia, if you want to liberate the Muslim lands, then this is radical. It's extreme. It's violent extremism. It is an idea that needs to be changed. It is an idea it is a mind that needs to be corrupted. And if the youth that hold these ideas, then they need to be secularized. As Ibn Khaldun, rahimahullah, he stated in Al-Muqaddimah, he says, throughout history, many nations have suffered a physical defeat. But that has never marked the end of a nation. But when a nation has become the victim of a psychological defeat, an intellectual defeat, then that marks the end of a nation. This is what it means, that this is an existential threat to the ummah. It will mark the end of this ummah. So this issue, my dear brothers and sisters, this issue is about us. It is about our kids. It's about our future and the future of this ummah itself. The assault on the Muslim mind can be broadly divided into three patterns or three areas. Number one, the historical assault. Number two, the contemporary assault, the assault that is taking place now, today. And number three, the assault from within. Let's look at number one. The historical assault that led to the separation between the temporal and the spiritual. That is, it led to the destruction of the Khilafah. The West understood that a military assault, a military campaign alone was not enough to defeat the Uthmani Khilafah and its representation of Islam on a global scale as a political power and as a worldview. Hence the European powers, they led a cultural attack. They led a cultural assault, and as well as an intellectual assault on the Muslim lands. They established missionaries in Istanbul, in Beirut, and even in Malta, and many other places throughout, for example, in the subcontinent and in the Middle East. To promote these centers, these missionary centers, they promoted and infused the populations with secular liberalism and the secular liberal worldview instead of the Islamic worldview. Moreover, the Orientalists, they redefined our history. They redefined our culture through a secular paradigm, through a secular prism. They viewed the Orient, that is Islam, and the Muslims themselves as being backwards, as being inferior, as being uncivilized, that needed the civilizing forces or the civilizing influences of the modern secular West. Key Orientalist figures like William Muir stated that the sword of Muhammad and the Quran are the most fatal enemies to civilization, to truth and liberty which the world has yet seen. End quote. This assault led to a secularization of our aqidah. It created doubts in our minds. It created doubts in our deen. And it created doubts and concerns that Islam was irrelevant to our political lives. The Muslim populace, the Muslim population was molded. They were molded like Plato to have an inferiority complex and view the West and its secular ideas as being superior to Islam and modern. Muslim scholars and intellectuals influenced by the West, they played a key role in forming the secular narrative on Islam. Next, the disease of nationalism was infused in the minds of the Muslims to create disunity among the Ummah. Nationalist movements like the Young Turks and the Arab revolts led by Sharif Hussein and Ibn Saud were promoted and organized and supported by the colonial West, the colonial powers at that time, which led to the ultimate destruction of the Khilafah. These nationalist identities and a colonized mentality continue to be a cause of our intellectual decline. This endeavor to assault the Muslim mind was not solely a European project, not solely a cause of the European powers. Even in the Americas, Muslims brought as slaves from Africa, who, by the way, were well-educated imams and scholars who upheld Islamic values. These slaves that were brought from Africa, they were either forcefully converted to Christianity or they were re-educated to adopt secular values. Moving on to the second type of assault, the contemporary assault that is taking place now. This contemporary assault on the Muslim mind is a continuation of the historical assault to shape the Muslim youth. America, the new colonial power, the new hegemon, has actively engaged in this assault as she became the leading nation after World War II. Richard Nixon, the former president of the United States, Richard Nixon in his book, Seize the Moment, states, listen to this, he states that the nightmare scenario is the reunification of Muslim lands under an Islamic leadership. The nightmare scenario is the reunification of Islamic lands under an Islamic leadership. Moreover, he warns against the new enemy, the Islamic fundamentalists, who are determined to restore the superiority of the Islamic civilization by resuscitating the past. And he goes on to say, they seek to impose the Sharia, a code of law based on the Quran that recognizes no separation between church and state. Though they look to the past as a guide for the future, they're not conservatives. They're revolutionaries.
Takbir! Allah Akbar! Takbir! Allah Akbar! Takbir! Allah Akbar!
To finish his quote, before they build the new, they intend to destroy the old. End quote. So this is the new enemy. This is the new enemy, the one who wants to practice Islam as a deen, as a complete system of life, combining the temporal and the spiritual. This is the new enemy who seeks to unite the Muslim Ummah, who wants to re-establish the Khilafah, who wants to implement the Sharia. This new enemy is the one who wants to live by Islam. Is this not what every Muslim wants? Are these not the aspirations of every single Muslim? So my dear brothers and sisters, tell me, is this really radical? Is it?
No.
So a narrative has been established by Western governments and the media that is imposed particularly on the Muslims living in the West and globally. This narrative seeks to link any act of violence by a Muslim as being violent extremism coming from a violent political ideology of Islam. Then the Muslims are forced to condemn. They're forced to assimilate, to prove their patriotism, to adopt Western values. You got to like it and you got to love it as well. Not just you're okay with them. You got to love these values. You need to reform Islam and redefine it so that it is palatable to secular liberalism. The forced conversion of Muslims in colonial America has now become the coerced conversion by secular narratives on Islam. Islamic terminologies like jihad, amr bil ma'ruf, nahy anil munkar, sharia, etc., they're all being redefined to fit the secular order. Hijab, women's rights, gender roles, laws on inheritance are all under attack. Moreover, we're being coerced. We're being coerced into accepting liberal values, into accepting feminism, and undermining Islamic injunctions on homosexuality and marriage itself. In the post-9/11 era, the battle for Muslim hearts and minds seeks to produce a good Muslim. A good Muslim who believes in a secular Islam and American Islam. Hence, draconian measures by Western governments, draconian laws by these Western governments, like countering violent extremism and prevent in Britain. These draconian measures, they define a apolitical model Muslim, assimilated into the liberal paradigms on Islam. Such assimilation has led us to lose our Islamic identity. Our youth are unable to distinguish between what is halal and what is haram. They're unable to distinguish between Islamic ideas and secular ideas. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, he stated that I fear when there will be a generation that is brought up in Islam but does not know Jahiliyyah. In our era, this is what's happening, and it is this Jahiliyyah of secularism. Moving on to the third type of assault, the third pattern of assault. The assault from within. This assault from within, it transcends both the historical and the contemporary assault to shape the Muslim mind. The pervasiveness of secular liberal values has led us to a pluralistic approach to reconcile the irreconcilable. One is unable to think beyond a pragmatic approach to make the Sharia compatible with the Western liberal thought. This, I believe, is the main reason why we cannot think beyond Western secular paradigms. The West has promoted certain individuals to influence us to accept the secular narratives with apparent Islamic scholarship. Historical figures like Jamaluddin Afghani, Muhammad Abdu, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, just to name a few, they played an immense role in propagating secular ideas as being Islamic by providing justification for such ideas through Islamic texts. Institutions like Al-Azhar University came under the influence of colonial powers and produced fatwa and scholars at the pleasure of these colonial powers. This continues to happen to this day. The British governor of occupied Britain at that time, Lord Cromer, he states, "It is absurd to suppose Europe will look on passively as a passive spectator while the retrograde government, based on purely Muhammadan principles," back in the day for Islam they used to say Muhammadan principles and Oriental ideas, that is Islam, is established in Egypt. The material interests at stake are too important. And he goes on to say, and this is the important part here, that the new generation of Egyptians, meaning Muslims, have to be persuaded or forced into imbibing by the true spirit of Western civilization. So the project never ended. It continues. Contemporary scholars, unknowingly, and some knowingly, have been victims of secularism. The very institutions that are built to produce Islamic scholars are compromised by the secular state, whether dictatorial or democratic. Schools, universities, Islamic institutions run by Muslim governments or Islamic institutions run by Muslims in Western countries are all unable to break the secular liberal paradigms. We have become victims of institutionalized secularism without even knowing it, without even realizing it. Such amalgamation of secular ideas with the veneer of Islam has had a debilitating effect on the Muslim mind. regardless of their intentions. Regardless of their intentions, the result is the same. The assault from within is impeding the Islamic revival of this ummah. In conclusion, the assault on the Muslim mind is part of a long-standing effort to reshape and transform Islam from within. An effort which has come to shape much of the United States' foreign and domestic policy. United States foreign policy is not just about nation building, it is also about religion building. Religion building, the pursuit of an American Islam, of a secular Islam, is part and parcel of a programmatic campaign to promote American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism, that an ideology that subverts religious subjects to its political order, to its political influences, under the veneer of tolerance and religious freedoms. The American Muslim comes to serve as an embodiment and representation of this American exceptionalism. Thus policies that are targeting Muslims in America, in reality are part of a discourse and a project the United States has actively promoted globally. The battle for hearts and minds of the Muslims in America and in the West in general is far from being a domestic issue. It's just one, albeit a very critical, battle in the ideological war to transform Islam. And I would like to end with what Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says in Surah At-Tawbah, ayah number 33. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى والدين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. It is He who has sent down His messenger with guidance in the deen of haqq, the deen of truth, so that it can dominate over all other deens. And in this case, in our era, it is secularism, even though the mushrikeen hate it. Inshallah, in the next two speeches, we will discuss the impact of this assault on the Muslim mind, and we will discuss how do we defeat this secularization. وآخر الدعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاكم الله خير.
محمد رسول الله